Welcome back, everyone. Uh, as you all probably know, or maybe some of you don't, because we did put this link out to to some new spots. I'm John Webster, and you're watching the John Webster Film Channel. This is uh, a YouTube live stream called Cinematic Realms. We're changing things up a little bit as we start up again. I'd like to welcome a returning guest, but now my new co-host, Mr. Jared Kozel, who some people think that he's an actor, but I don't have enough. I don't have enough money to consistently hire an actor every week. So y'all are gonna have to finally accept the truth. Jared,
Yeah,
welcome.
and if I were an actor, I would technically be scabbing right now, which is not something I would do. So I think hopefully this puts that to bed forever. I'm just a guy who's very fortunate enough to have some cool friends who like to talk about cool things. John, this is your show, but I'm happy to be along for the ride in a more, shall we say, official capacity now.
Yes, and actually, since it's been brought up now, obviously we're coming back to do this and to discuss films and television shows at a time when there's some things going on in the industry. A couple of strikes that people may have heard about. And today we are actually going to be talking about the two-part premiere of Ahsoka, which is it's a program from a Struck company, and we want to be conscious of the fact that we're letting everybody know about things they can do actually to support the unions who are striking. Um, so, Jared, you were kind enough to send me this to read out, and it's just something we want to make clear that this video was created during the 2023 WGA and SAG-AFTRA strikes. And without the labor of the writers and actors currently on strike, Ahsoka and many other shows and movies would not exist. I've also posted some links in the description of the video, one of which is to the Entertainment Community Fund, another SAG-AFTRA financial assistance, also the WGA Good and Welfare Emergency Assistance Loans. And there's another link, which is the Think Tank for Inclusion and Equity WGA Strike Resources, which has a much longer list than I would have been able to find on my own of places you can go to support the union. So please, if you're enjoying Ahsoka, if you enjoy this stream, please go check out those links and consider supporting the unions, because we stand behind them 200%. And the only reason really why we're going ahead with the streams is that we're a pretty small channel. So for myself, I felt comfortable, the fact that I'm not SAG. I don't have any anticipation that I will be SAG or WGA at any point, except in my dreams. Um, and and we're a very, very small channel at this point. I I think that it's probably only our close friends, who are probably in the chat at this moment and watching, and even while we hope we will get more viewers, we're very small. So I don't feel that we're quote unquote influencers, um, but we still want to be cognizant of making sure that we support the strikes and get that message out there. So please do click on those links and and do what you can. But anyway, so but here we are, and Jared, this is your first time on as my co-host, and kind of a new phase for the channel. My plan is to go back to doing weekly streams, and I've realized that as much hard work as it is to put out a weekly YouTube stream, podcast, etc., it's harder for me to not do it because film and television, and et cetera, et cetera, it's such a important part of my life, and to not sort of give in to my desire to obsess over those things, it kind of cuts out a little piece of my heart. So it's very important for me to go back to doing this on the regular, and maybe be a bit more me than I've ever been in sort of how I geek out about the stuff. And I knew that I didn't want to plunge back into that alone. And everyone's been really great about coming on to guest on the channel, but it's hard to arrange that week after week. And so I knew I wanted to invite someone who was a close friend and who kind of, has a shared passion for movies and television. And Jared, so many people have said, beyond the actor joke, that we're just the same person, which I think we disproved a while back, but we do share a lot of common interests and passions. So for me, it was an easy choice.
Yeah, and I feel very humbled that you thought to ask me. Honestly, anytime you've invited me to either be on this channel or on Here Be Dragons, I've always been very touched and very happy for the opportunity. Never with any expectation that it would become a recurring thing or something more permanent, such as a co-hosting gig. But I'm very happy to do it, and I'm just looking forward to hopefully, allowing the channel to move forward in a bit more of a consistent fashion, because life happens, and I know that there have been some starts and stops, but it's really my goal is ultimately, in addition to being your kind of conversation partner, is to kind of support your vision for the channel, because this is still your channel. This is still John Webster Film, and while I am, happy to be your co-host, I also am not seeking to, take over in any way. I'm here, and I'm the Chewbacca to your Han Solo. Let's put it that way.
Well, we'll see how that works out, because of course, absolute power corrupts absolutely. Give it time. So, before we get into Ahsoka, I do feel like I want to devote a couple minutes, because I told people this would be just as much an introductory episode as talking about Ahsoka, which we will get into very shortly. But for people who might watch this for the first time, because I am hoping to bring in some new people, which, by the way, even if you're watching this after the fact, or if judging by the viewer count, I don't think we have any new viewer lurkers at the moment, but but if you do end up watching this, there should be a little button in the corner of the screen to click on. Please subscribe to the channel. We'd love to see you guys come back and watch for our live streams. But no, I wanted to just sort of introduce yourself, Jared, and introduce sort of, you have a certain affinity for a galaxy far, far away, but you also have many other interests as well. So just a quick introduction.
Yeah, so for anyone who hasn't seen me on the channel before, my name is Jared Kozel. I am, by my day job, I am a family medicine physician. I had been living in Connecticut for several years while I underwent my medical school and residency training. Just within the past month, I have relocated to California, specifically the Bay Area, and I'm currently in the process of, finding a new job out here, trying to get myself established. But in terms of what's more relevant for this channel, I am a lifelong lover of movies in general, and in particular fantasy stories, and in particular Star Wars, Lord of the Rings, Game of Thrones, things that all might be familiar to residents of our friend group. But John and I connected back in 2018, 2019, thereabouts, when a little show called Game of Thrones was airing, and we met on the website formerly known as Twitter, now standing in with some letter at the 24th letter of the alphabet. But we quickly started to become aligned in our both our tastes and our appreciation for that show, but also we started to discover other things we had in common, namely the fact that we both loved the Keira Knightley film Pride and Prejudice, and more generally Keira Knightley, and that we also share a similar love of Lord of the Rings and Star Wars. And over time, it just, one of us would float a movie, and we realized, oh, you like that movie? I love that movie too. And that's and so naturally our friendship grew from there. And John eventually, back during the first iteration of his channel, was kind enough to invite me on to discuss the aforementioned 2005 version of Pride and Prejudice, starring Keira Knightley and Matthew Macfadyen. And then over the years, I've kind of guested on the channel a few times, and also on the Here Be Dragons channel, primarily talking about Star Wars, but occasionally talking about something else. And we did meet in person at Here Be Con a couple years ago in Dallas, proving that we are in fact different people, because there were witnesses to us being in the same place at the same time. But yeah, John remains a very good friend, and I'm always happy to talk to him about our shared interests in movies and television, even when we disagree, which is rare, but there are a few points that perhaps we'll one day get into. But for the most part, we are united in essentially our way we like to approach movies and television, which is we want to look for things to celebrate. We want to be positive, which can be a loaded term for some, but I personally choose to see it as we look for the good in what's there. We look for the appreciation, even if it's something that we don't appreciate ourselves. If someone else expresses appreciation for it, we support that appreciation. And if something doesn't work for us, it's our goal to kind of not just say with a blanket statement, oh, that's terrible, that sucks, but more, why doesn't that work for us? And if it does work for someone else, let's talk about it. So,
yeah. I think some of our friends probably find both of us to be maddeningly positive. But and in that sense, like I do want to, partly because Mr. Ken Knapsack was gracious enough to let me post the link for this stream over in the Force Center Discord. I wanted to sort of pay tribute to the Force Center podcast, because although I didn't, my positivity didn't originate with Force Center, I think I was called to start listening to that podcast because they are such champions of positivity, specifically in the Star Wars community. So I just want to say thank you to those guys, to Ken, Joseph, and Jennifer over there who do such a great job. They've built a community over there, which is unlike anything else in the Star Wars fandom, I have to say.
Yeah, I heartily concur. Been a listener for 9 years. I'll give that a Force Center well said. And funny you should mention it. Not that I'm, again, promoting anything, but happen to be wearing my Force Center t-shirt right now with one of their favorite phrases, speculate responsibly, which is also something that we try to do here.
I have ripped off that saying numerous times. And I always, give credit to them whenever I steal something. But, if they, didn't have such a wonderful way of looking at things, that I wouldn't have to be a thief so much. For myself, I don't have, I'm ashamed to say I don't have a Force Center t-shirt, but I am wearing my Ahsoka and Rex shirt today in honor of what we're talking about, which by the way, I do still have my fingers crossed for a Rex.
I have a feeling. I hear that Tamura Morrison has appeared in a couple of these shows, and he's always down to reprise one of his many roles in the Star Wars galaxy, shall we say.
Yeah, and I'm not going to belabor this point too long, because when we get to an upcoming stream, we will be going on and on about this aspect of our shared interests. But the only reason I'm not announcing a Kira Knightley stream for next week is because our wonderful friend Ari is going to be joining us for going to be a Pirates of the Caribbean 20th anniversary stream, and she's not able to make it next week, so we're putting it off for a couple weeks. But when we get there, it's going to be the Knights of Kira reunited. So definitely looking forward to that. But let's go ahead and move on to our main event, talking about the first two parts of Ahsoka, which I don't know about you, Jared, but when this show started up, the whole thing felt very surreal as it was starting. Oh my God, I've been waiting for this for so long. And not just the show itself, but as much as I've gone on in the past about, my sort of disdain for the way animation is kind of looked down. People look down at it. And so when it was announced that this show was going to be live action, I was like, I wish they would have just continued the Star Wars Rebels story in animation. And we'll get into how this is or is not actually just a direct continuation of Rebels, because I think it's more complicated than that. But when this started up, I got chills down my spine, just because it is bringing these characters and this story into the live action realm, which, despite everything I said before, it is very thrilling as a fan of these characters. I'm wondering, what your feeling was as the show started.
Yeah, so I'm also a fan of animation, particularly Star Wars animation, but animation in general. But I did not have the same concerns necessarily about these characters being translated into live action, because I knew the person behind this show, behind the camera, behind the script, Dave Filoni, who helped create these characters, would be the one guiding them. And also kind of his approach, which he has said this in the past when certain more cynical outlets have accused him of using his opportunities in live action Star Wars and the Mandoverse to put, quote unquote, his characters from animation into live action. And he has pushed back on that by saying, I don't think of these characters as animated characters. I think of them as characters, living, breathing characters within this galaxy. And while we first met a lot of these characters, including the titular character Ahsoka in animation, she has grown beyond that. She is just, a character in the Star Wars galaxy now, that at one time, you know, she was the new face on the block, and people had thoughts about her being involved in the Star Wars galaxy at all. In the Clone Wars movie where she was introduced, that was our first time seeing many of the favorite characters, Obi-Wan, Anakin, in animation. And for some, that was a little weird. But over time, they became, it wasn't the animated version of Anakin, it wasn't the animated version of Obi-Wan, it was just Obi-Wan and Anakin and their continuing adventures, of which Ahsoka became an integral part. And now the stream is flowing the other way, and Ahsoka has made her move to live action, as well as several other beloved characters from the Rebels franchise. And to me, I am just happy to see their stories continue at all. I do agree that, you know, the easy shorthand of calling this Rebel Season 5 is probably makes it a little bit more complicated, but I think where I push back on it is I do not feel that, even though we are getting a continuation directly from the end of Rebels, even though we are getting certain scenes created almost shot for shot from the Rebels finale, I don't see Ahsoka as Rebel Season 5, except in a tongue-in-cheek way. I see it as the continuing story of these characters. And in that respect, I feel comfortable having this story continued in live action. If this was actually Rebel Season 5 and they just decided, oh, we're going to do it live action now, I might feel differently about that. But in this case, I'm totally happy to see these characters progress in this new medium, especially played by such amazing and talented actors as they are.
Yeah, and even saying that, you know, this picked off from the last shot of Rebels is deceptive, because we didn't know exactly when that epilogue took place, and now we see the recreation of that moment in this show, but this is 7 years removed from the Battle of Lothal. And a lot has happened, a lot that, like, yeah, okay, so we saw that shot with Sabine and Ahsoka at the very end of Rebels, but we had no context for anything of like what their relationship eventually became, the fact that Sabine became her apprentice. That is stuff that's like, you know, there was none of that in the finale of Rebels. So there's so much that's happened in the time in between. So it's almost like we missed an entire show, honestly, in between this, or a couple of movies. And so that's also why I've kind of pushed back when people, you know, even though it's funny, I'm very conflicted, because I'll hear people say, well, I feel like I've missed out on some stuff. What do I need to watch to understand what's going on? And on the one hand, I'm like, ooh, you should watch Clone Wars and Rebels, and you'll get so much context. But on the other hand, because then for some viewers, it becomes quote unquote homework for what they need. But I actually don't think, and granted, you know, I'm biased. I've already seen the other shows, but I think the way that Filoni has set up this show, I don't think you actually need those, because like I said, there's stuff that's happened in between Rebels and the series that even we don't really know about, and maybe we'll at some later point get some books or something that, you know, that sort of fill in the story in between. But it really is sort of, especially with that opening crawl, which was so amazing. It really does feel like we're almost like the original Star Wars, where we're being put into the middle of an ongoing story, and there's references to stuff that is not crystal clear for us, but it's just like in the original film, where you get references to the Clone Wars and, you know, and all that stuff that, you know, in 1977, nobody knew what any of that stuff was. So I think they've done a really good job of, like, they tell you the information you need to know, but I don't think it's overburdened with exposition or anything like that.
No, I was very happy with how much Ahsoka in these first two episodes felt like its own show and felt like a new show that was kind of picking up from a point in the timeline and making references to things that had happened before, but not being overly reliant on them. For instance, they mentioned that, Thrawn, they thought Thrawn was gone. They thought he'd been killed. And that Ezra helped to, defeat Thrawn. But they don't go into how and why that happened. They just, kind of the characters mention it because the characters know the history already. And that their emotional reactions are kind of what gives it the power in that moment. And it's anecdotal, but I did watch these first two episodes with my parents, and neither one of them who have seen any of Rebels and only maybe a handful of episodes of Clone Wars, they were able to follow it perfectly fine. So I do agree that it's everyone who is interested should watch Clone Wars and watch Rebels because they are excellent Star Wars shows and you will have an enriched experience. But I also feel quite strongly that if this show had taken the approach that you needed to watch 133 episodes of Clone Wars and 75 episodes of Rebels in order to get it, then irrespective of how good the show was, it would have been a failure. Which it is not. I think it is the opposite of a failure. I think it is, at least through the first two episodes, a resounding success, and hopefully that it will continue to build on that.
Yeah. I want to go back to, like, I've already mentioned it, but I have to talk about the opening crawl. It's such a, like I'm almost giddy talking about it because I love Dave Filoni so much because you can just tell that when he's going all in with this. It actually does remind me of like when we got the Clone Wars finale and the Siege of Mandalore, how it's he used red text there to open up and it was like the old school Lucasfilm lettering and all that stuff. Like, so he's very interested in claiming this as part of a lineage of, classic Star Wars. And we don't get it doesn't open with the John Williams music and the Star Wars logo going back into the stars, but we do get a crawl and it just, I think it sets you up with everything you need to know going into the story. And Kevin Kiner's music, just there's obviously, he returns with a lot of the themes and motifs that have been associated with these characters in animation, but he also went in a different direction that I wasn't quite expecting. There's a lot of deep violin music and percussive stuff that is just absolutely beautiful. And I'm just so glad that he was given the opportunity to come in and do the music, because I don't want to use the word afraid because he did a great job on The Mandalorian, but I was kind of afraid that they would just give it to Ludwig, and because he had done him and Joseph Shirley have done the music for The Mandalorian and the Book of Boba Fett. So I thought, well, they'll probably just keep going with that. So when Kevin Kiner was announced, that was like, yes.
Yeah, no, he is richly deserving of such an opportunity, and it wasn't guaranteed, but I'm glad that they chose him, and he is getting a chance to not only build on his previous work, but also to stretch his wings with in particular, that new Ahsoka theme that plays over the end credits is just perfect.
Which that has got to be it's already one of my favorite credit sequences. They could have had that as the opening credits.
Yeah.
As far as I'm concerned, and it would have been up there with the Game of Thrones opening. So.
Yeah, no, I'm very happy with it. I've actually been watching one of the Star Wars Explained videos, and he actually pointed out that though it shows them bouncing back and forth between these different planets, and that if you translate those runes that are by each one, it actually identifies what some of the planets are, like Lothal and Dathomir and Gorel and Coruscant, and you're like, oh, it's actually like building, it's like the actual star map in the show, which is cool. That the fact that they put that level of detail into it, and I do love that they did an opening crawl as well. As someone whose first love in Star Wars was the movies, and in many respects remains the movies, I'm always happy when the TV shows can be cinematic as possible, and
Yeah.
we haven't had, like, outside of the Skywalker saga films and kind of a little bit of what they did with Solo, a Star Wars story. We haven't had an opening crawl in any of the other live action shows. So this kind of helps sets it apart, and it feels very fitting that it's George Lucas's apprentice, Dave Filoni, who is the one who's like, this is the show where I'm the primary creative force, and this is how I'm going to open it up.
Yeah, and this felt like, and I mean this in a really good way, because sometimes people say it as sort of like a snide, you know, shot at like the prequels and stuff. But this felt so George Lucas in terms of its story scale and the stuff we got. It seemed like what we're getting with this is like the culmination of the things that he was trying to work towards with all the revolutionary stuff that he pioneered, and the fact that it is Filoni who was his apprentice. And it feels for every reason that I loved Andor, for the way that it went in a different direction, and that Andor feels cinematic in a way that, like, when the show started off, I said, "Oh, this is the Blade Runner 2049 of Star Wars," and so that has it's a very distinct sort of cinematic quality with that. But this is cinematic in the George Lucas fashion, of pulp, space opera, grand mythic storytelling, and it felt big.
It did.
And I just love that, because that has been one of my criticisms, as much as I've enjoyed The Mandalorian. And part of that is they were still kind of, it's been a journey with that show of working out the kinks with, technology like the volume and things like that, and getting that show to feel bigger. But I really feel like it's all that is coming to fruition with this show, because it just felt it felt like big screen Star Wars to me.
Yeah, and it also helps that it really is playing with a lot of those ideas that are really prevalent in the Skywalker saga films, and it's also featuring and starring one of the last major characters that George Lucas helped create for Star Wars, along with Dave Filoni, in Ahsoka Tano. When the Obi-Wan Kenobi show was airing last year, because of the way that it brought back in characters, important characters and actors in Hayden Christensen's Anakin and Ewan McGregor's Obi-Wan. As that series kind of wrapped up, I kind of began thinking of it in my mind informally as episode 3.5 of the Skywalker saga, because it just felt so integral in that way in terms of its story. And I think Ahsoka is similar. It doesn't have exactly the same approach, because it's not picking up with the same characters who feature in the films, but it is filling in a very important chapter in Star Wars history, one that we've only really started to explore this timeline. There are 30 years between the end of Return of the Jedi and the start of Force Awakens, And so far, we've kind of spent that time on the outskirts with, the Mandalorian, in the criminal underworld, and now it's starting in that show. They're starting to build back into the galactic politics in this most recent season. But Ahsoka feels like the largest statement on the map in this time period, in that it is about the big stuff. It is about the New Republic versus this fledgling, imperial remnant that's trying to regain a foothold once again, featuring, major characters, but characters that we haven't had quite this big a spotlight before. And it feels big. And that's why I feel like the show, it helps that it has that cinematic take, because it's, it needs to, you need to feel like, oh, this is an important story to be told. And I feel like it is. And the filmmaking production has matched that so far for me.
Yeah. And as much as, I've said that it's my personal belief, as we discussed, that you don't need to have seen the animated shows to follow this story. But at the same time, I am like positively geeking out over all the stuff from the animated shows that is now on the screen. It's like this is sharing the world with the Star Wars of the films, and the fact that we see a live action Lothal. We're talking about the Witches of Dathomir. It's all this stuff. I'm just like, I'm watching, I'm like, oh my God, this is like, it's funny that for me, this all springs from that moment in Solo when Maul appears at the end and mentions Dathomir, and I'm like, they're doing it. They're really doing it. And it's the kind of thing that I, could only dream of making its way into, this realm to be fully integrated with the rest of the live action storytelling. So, and just a random aside, since I'm talking about things making the jump to live action, I totally geeked out when I saw Clancy Brown appear. All of a sudden. What's the character's name?
Jai Kell.
No. I had Clancy Brown's
character. Ryder Azadi.
Yeah. Who, of course, and again, it's something you don't need to have, seen Rebels. He's clearly the leader of Lothal. But if you have seen those shows, it's just really fun that they brought him back after he voiced the character. So, and that's the thing. I would say that going back and watching Clone Wars and Rebels will enhance your appreciation of this series, but it's not vital to following it.
Mm-hmm. Exactly.
Thank you, Cassie. I feel better. Like I'm a huge Star Wars fan, but I can't always remember all the names. It's like it just reminds me of when I read, both the Silmarillion and A Game of Thrones for the first time. I had to keep going back to like the index and looking at characters' names, especially the Silmarillion. They got like 50 characters that start with Finn. Finrod, Fingolfin, Finarfin. It's just at a certain point you're like, oh, I give up. The guy. But let's, I'm sure we'll be gushing about all our beloved characters. But I do want to sort of start with the opening sequence that we get in the show and talk about our new characters. Mm-hmm. Especially because one of them I've been a big fan of for so many years, and sadly we just lost him recently. Mr. Ray Stevenson, who plays Balon Skull, and his apprentice, the actress's name is Ivana Shopno. I think I'm if I'm getting that right, playing Shin Hati. And yeah, I can't say enough wonderful things about Ray Stevenson, and I like the fact that, you know, he appears to be, you know, a villain aligned with the villains, but there's something very warm about him. I don't know, just his demeanor. It's like, you know, it'll be interesting to see where his character goes, because he doesn't read like a quote unquote bad guy, but he's doing bad things, and, you know, presumably for money and power, you know, as seems to be the case so far. But yeah, I'll be really interested to see, you know, what his end game is.
Yeah, he is a fascinating character. I mean, they both are, but specifically Balon Skull. You know, they established in this first episode that he was a former Jedi who vanished after Order 66. And they allude to the fact that he has become a mercenary. He's being paid by Morgan Elsbeth to do the things that he's doing, but also it's clear that he has, like Omar Little and Sandor Clegane before him. This is a man who has a code. You know, he may be doing bad things in the service of bad people, and he will kill and murder, as we saw, but you can tell that he is not doing it for reasons that, as say, like Emperor Palpatine or Darth Vader or Darth Maul, with a pure, undampened desire to dominate. I do believe him when he says he wants power, as he tells his apprentice. Yes. But I also think that he has his reasons for doing what he's doing, and I will be fascinated to find out what they are. And as for Shin Hati, I'm in full agreement with what Peter Griffin said there in the the chat. The whole "I can fix her," you know, sensation. It's kind of loaded, but anyone who's been in the Force Center Discard knows that I'm harboring a little bit of a crush on this smoky Darksider with a bat with I won't say a heart of gold, but, you know, clearly, you know, who's got she's got a fiery burning passion in there that I think, you know, I'm hopeful that as things go on, we'll start to see, you know, why she's so determined and committed to, you know, to this cause. She seems to be fiercely loyal to her master, and but yeah, I have a little bit of a weak spot for dark side villains who might have something else going on there. I'm thinking of Trilla Siduri and Night Sister Marin from the Jedi Fallen Order games, Asajj of Ventress, and I'm getting very similar vibes from Miss Shin Hati. So I am. Let's just say the flames of Dathomir have kind of been awakened in my heart for this one. So I'm hoping that she will become, you know, but I am very interested to see where her character goes. This is just a little bit of a fun kind of, you know, a schoolboy crush, shall we say.
And I did also want to say hello to Mr. Peter Griffin. I've seen you a lot in the Here Be Dragons chats in the past, but I don't know that I've, at least not very often, seen you in the chat here on my channel. So I want to thank you for stopping in. And but yeah, no, we haven't gotten much of Shin yet, so I'll be interested to see like what her backstory is. For now, like, she's a real badass fighter, and yeah, no, it's, you know, I'm feeling like if there's not some kind of like redemption angle for her, which I don't know if they're going that way, but it does feel like they're building up, like there could be animosity between her and
her and Sabine.
Her and Sabine going forward. But I will say about sorry, my mind's going to Balin. Like I want to say, like, one of my favorite lines from him was something to the effect of it would be a shame to kill her. There's not many Jedi left. And then Morgan says sentiment, and he goes truth. It's just, he's so fascinating. Just, he clearly doesn't want to kill her, but he's also like, if that's what has to happen in pursuit of, completing his objective, he seems like he's willing to do it. He just won't be happy about it. Mm-hmm. But, and I just find that really fascinating for a character who was a Jedi, and, is now, filling the role of mercenary, but we don't, it just feels like he's got an angle there that we're not completely privy to. And it'll be interesting, like, what happens when, if they do find Thrawn. I say if, we've seen him in the trailer. But yeah, when he comes face to face with Thrawn, like, how will his objective then be revealed, and, what might it be? So I'm interested to find that out, definitely.
Yes, he feels like, Morgan Elsbeth, who they're working for at the moment, clearly seems to be very loyal to Thrawn and the idea of Thrawn. Balin and Shin very much feel like they're performing this, this cause, not one, because they're getting paid, and two, but it feels more like they're open to align right now with the purpose of bringing Thrawn back to the galaxy, but I don't think that they are, fully in line with the idea of just becoming his foot soldiers in the new empire. I think they have something else that they're planning.
By the way, Morgan Elsbeth, when we got her in The Mandalorian, I did not realize there would be so much to, her character. She's, she didn't say she was necessarily one herself, but she's got some magic going on. But she does say she's descended from the witches of Dathomir.
Yes, I believe her. I do think that she. It's interesting. Like, I believe she is human rather than Dathomirian, as most of the other Night Sisters were. Mm-hmm. But clearly, she does seem to have that. Their magic and their history and their power. They had talked about in the Mandalorian episode that introduced her that she was one of the last survivors of her people who had been massacred. And at the time, some had wondered, could that have been the Night Sisters of Dathomir? But here we have it confirmed. And I think it's a fascinating angle, not in the least of which, because this is the first time that we've had a Night Sister of Dathomir and Night Sister magic, such as it is in live action. And I'm looking forward to seeing it unleashed going forward.
Yeah, I can already guess what all the fan theories on Merrick are, and that is, let me see if I got a picture of him somewhere. But I can imagine anytime there's a masked character, the fandom goes a little wild with theories on who that might be, and then it usually ends up being less dramatic than than what people imagine. I don't know. I know there were some early theories that it could be a certain Clone Wars character who we haven't seen in a while, but I don't know. I tend to think that that it's not as complicated as that, but we'll see. You have any notions of
Well, so I had actually, I do think I'm leaving at least a 10% possibility that it could be a character that we know, and specifically that character from the Clone Wars that has ties to Ahsoka Barris. But I do feel that, well, I had personally been under the opinion when I first saw the character of Marok that, you know, his armor looks very similar to one of the Inquisitors we met in Rebels, specifically the Eighth Brother. The Star Wars Explained had been kind of on that theory as well, and we had believed that the Eighth Brother had died in the episode Twilight of the Apprentice when his helicopter lightsaber malfunctioned. But if you don't know what that is in Rebels, it is exactly what it sounds like. But it does, and you know, but he could very well have survived. But if it is him, I'm going to be interested to see why Filoni brought him back, and if he's not a character who we've ever met before, then I'm going to be interested why he felt like this character also needed to be in the show in addition to Baylan and Shin. Maybe it was just to have a more, like, you know, faceless antagonist. And if it does turn out to be someone like Barris, then, you know, I am going to be open to that, and I'm going to want to see why he wanted to bring this character back now. I will say that it is a male actor currently who's portraying Marok, but that means nothing. As soon as the mask comes off, it could very well be a woman in there.
Yeah, my only hesitation about if it is Barris is the way that they integrate that into the story, because that could potentially be, you know, going against what we've been talking about this being welcoming to new viewers. And is a reveal like that going to be, it would mean a lot to longtime viewers of Clone Wars, but it would, unless they did it in the right way, it would potentially fall flat for people who aren't familiar with that material. So yeah, for now, I'm of the opinion that it's just Marok, and it's just a villain that they needed. So yeah, but okay, I'm just going to go all over the place here because there's so much to talk about. We're going to get to our actual main character soon enough, but like, I have to talk about the epic return of Chopper. Because this is
who has been in live action before. He's the one. He was very briefly in Rogue One.
Very briefly. But I just got so much joy out of seeing him be so perfectly Chopper. Like, they didn't tone him down at all for this.
Yeah.
He is just as wonderfully, you know, wonderfully Chopper as he ever was, with a few screws loose. My dad was watching this as he was when I was doing my rewatch. He was in the living room, and like, even if he wasn't like tuned in to the rest of the show, I think he was just kind of barely sort of aware of it going on. As soon as Chopper came on screen, he was glued to the show. Because Chopper is just such a fun character. And I love the fact that I mentioned this in the Force Center Discord. I don't know if this was apparent on Rebels, but I really became aware of the fact in this that when Chopper talks, you can actually understand some of what he's saying, because it's very thinly veiled English, just droidified.
Yeah, you could always pick some of it up from context, but it's a little bit easier to do in this show, especially if you know what you're listening for. Specifically, I loved the moment where he's searching for the tracker and he can't find it, and he warbles at Hera, "Did you go through my stuff?" And she's like, "No, I did not go through your stuff."
Yes, you did. It's so great. And that is really when we'll get to Hera in a bit, but that is when I felt she was at her most, Hera, was that dynamic between her and Chopper, because you have to nail that, and I thought that was just perfect. But so let's go ahead and tackle our wonderful main characters. We'll go ahead and start with Ahsoka herself. How are you feeling about how Rosario Dawson has embodied Ahsoka?
I have really loved her performance. I was always a fan of Rosario Dawson as an actress. And part of the reason, I've been so accepting of the character in this time frame, one, because I think Rosario is doing an excellent job, but also this is Ahsoka at a somewhat, different point in her life than we had known her previously. She was a much younger character in Clone Wars, and she was slightly older in Rebels, and it was still the wonderful Ashley Eckstein playing her. But this is an Ahsoka who has been changed, shall we say, because aside from the brief appearance that she had in the episode The World Between Worlds and Rebels, and at the very end of the epilogue, we have not really, until she appeared in The Mandalorian, we really had not seen her since she went through that traumatic experience of coming face to face with her old master, Anakin, now Darth Vader, once again. And one of the things that was abundantly clear in her original appearance in The Mandalorian was that experience had changed her. She was, she is still fundamentally Ahsoka. She is still courageous and brave and strong-willed and funny and charming, but she's scarred from that experience because, and people commented on this in the Mandalorian episode, that her reluctance to train Grogu clearly stems directly from the still unresolved trauma that she has about what happened to Anakin and how it was his attachment to those he loved that became twisted, that led to his downfall. And it does not appear, had not appeared at least at that point in the timeline, that Ahsoka was either aware that Anakin had ultimately returned to the light, or if she was aware, she had not reconciled with it. Contrast that interestingly with her appearance in the Book of Boba Fett when she's talking to Luke, where she very clearly does seem to have, be aware that Anakin returned to the light, and she seems to be in a much better and more emotionally healthy place, and she seems more like the old Ahsoka in that appearance. It's very clear right now that this show takes place after the original episode that she appears in The Mandalorian. I will be interested to see where her appearance in the Book of Boba Fett falls in relation to this show, because I don't think it's happened yet. But we'll see. Regardless, I feel that Rosario is doing an excellent job of portraying Ahsoka as a much more, mature character, and with that maturity comes, the past experiences that have shaped her, most of which have been, severely traumatic for her in terms of the loss of the Order, the loss of Anakin, and we see her in many respects be almost cold. And I don't believe she is a cold person, but I believe that she is struggling with that ultimate, test for what any Jedi must face, which is their fear. Confronting fear is the destiny of a Jedi, as Luke says in The Rise of Skywalker. And it really is. Ahsoka has yet to confront her fear on this specific instance about what it means to have such a close attachment to someone, and how it can shape you for better, or, and as she clearly is worried about, for worse. And I do expect we will see that journey. That I do believe that will be the heart of her emotional journey throughout this show, as well as her coming to terms with whether or not she truly believes herself to be a Jedi Knight at this point. You know, everyone loves to talk about that line that she mentions in Rebels, "I am no Jedi," and people take it as this really authoritative statement, but I never saw it that way. I think she is struggling to figure out how much of the old Jedi she is, and if she the last of the old Jedi, if she's the first of the new. And I think by the end of this show, she will have come to a more accepting place of the Jedi and her role in taking on that identity.
It's also very interesting just the fact that the apprentice that she has taken on, during these missing years that we haven't seen much of, is someone who is not very like naturally gifted in the Force, and we don't really even know to what degree she is. The Force resides in everybody, but it's clear that, if we have any doubt, Huyang, says to her, I have known many Jedi and Padawan, over all my years, and I feel safe in saying that, your what does he say, skill and aptitude would fall short of all of them.
Yeah.
So it does seem like she didn't all of a sudden become naturally gifted in the Force on the level of a Luke or a Grogu. So it's interesting that Ahsoka chooses to take her on as a Padawan. Is that, like, I wonder if that's part of Ahsoka's sort of she's not sure whether she considers herself a Jedi or not. Maybe she considers it, given what happened to Anakin, it's safer to take on someone who is not very strong in the Force, to teach that person sort of the tenets of the Jedi Order and the skills, but not necessarily have to worry about that person's being like succumbing to the dark side in the way that Anakin did. And we don't, and this is just sort of guessing on my part because there's a lot we don't know, but yeah, I'd be interested to see if we get more of like what precipitated her taking her on, and also why they had a falling out.
Yeah, I mean, I think we have to. I think we will, definitely learn. We will definitely learn like why they, why Ahsoka walked away. And hopefully we'll learn more about their early training and when it had started, and why Sabine was so, keen to take on this new mantle of a Jedi Padawan learner, which she is. They make that clear in the show. I personally find this choice fascinating, and I actually kind of love it to have Sabine be Ahsoka's apprentice, and the idea that she is specifically training to be a Jedi. It's not just lightsaber training, as some theorized, and as we kind of saw a little bit in that Rebels episode, Trial of the Darksaber, in which Kanan makes the very clear point that the Force does reside in all living things. And the fact that Sabine is not as naturally gifted with the Force as, say, someone like Luke or Ahsoka or Ezra, is very, it makes for her for a fascinating, it's something we haven't seen in Star Wars before. But I do love that they make it clear that she does still have the potential to, wield the Force. It's not a binary thing. We think of people as Force sensitive and not Force sensitive, and it's always been more of a spectrum. But now they're making that a bit more explicit. There were some people who were like, I'm going to be very mad if they suddenly made Sabine Force sensitive, and it's clear that Sabine was always had Force sensitive in a way. She just doesn't have the same natural abilities. George Lucas has used this analogy many times, so I will just briefly summarize it here. It's essentially, some people in the world have natural athletic talent for a sport like, say, basketball. And there might be, someone who is from a distant country that never picked up a basketball until they were 15, 16 years old. Someone like, say, Joel Embiid, who then starts to play basketball, and because they're 7'3" and they're naturally athletic, within 4 years they're playing in the NBA at a high level. Contrast that with someone who might, have grown up from the age of 3 loving basketball. They play for 5 hours every day. They play and they play and they play, and they might actually develop into a great player. But if they're 5'2", they're probably not ever making it to the NBA, and that kind of feels like what they're doing with Sabine, because George Lucas's idea was anyone can learn to wield the Force. It just takes training and discipline and time. And if you don't have the same natural talent as someone like Anakin with a midi-chlorian count of 20,000, that you might have to train that much harder to be able to wield it. And Sabine freely admits in this episode that she hasn't been keeping up with her training since Ahsoka walked away. And Huyang, while he does humorously chide her and say that, oh, compared to all the Jedi Padawans I've known, your Force potential, would be lower than any of them. But he's the one encouraging her to train, and he has that very point.
He follows that up by saying, the only person whose time you're wasting is your own.
Which I loved that line. That actually might have been my favorite scene in both episodes, honestly. I really love that idea. Because, Sabine really, when it comes down to it, she will have to make the choice about, does she truly want this? And it seems like she does. We haven't seen any indication that she doesn't want to be a Jedi Padawan. She just feels like she can't do it without Ahsoka's training, and she's upset that Ahsoka had walked away from her. But I feel that put it this way, if by the end of this show, we do see Sabine actually using the Force to lift rocks, as they say, I do not believe it will have come out of nowhere. I feel like it will represent that, she has unlocked something in herself that now allows her to wield the Force in that way. And it's clear that in addition to everything that she has going on with Ahsoka in terms of her, issues with having been, for lack of a better word, abandoned, she has another big piece of trauma that I'm going to be very keen to see if we learn about, because at this point in the timeline, Sabine, proud Mandalorian, has to be aware that after she gave the Darksaber to Bo-Katan and inspired that uprising, the Empire came in and wiped her people out. And she wasn't there. She was on Lothal honoring her promise to Ezra. And that I truly believe that has to be addressed at some point.
Yeah, and this is why when people say, well, I didn't see I didn't see Star Wars Rebels, so I'm going to be lost. It's like, but so much has happened to these characters since that show, some of which is implied by things we've seen on The Mandalorian. Like you just said, the destruction of Mandalore. These characters are in such completely different places to where they were at the end of Star Wars Rebels. So that's why I'm like, you're not going to be as lost as you think you might be. Something weird happens when people think they've missed out on something, is that then they start thinking that they're going to not be able to follow every little beat. It's like, no, you'll be fine. But I want to backtrack for a second and let's pay tribute to the man.
Yes.
Or the droid. David Tennant playing Huyang. I did not know he was going to have as big a part in this as he does. And I am so overjoyed because David Tennant, who somehow don't know, of course, played Doctor Who and many other wonderful things. He's also in Good Omens, which is a show that I love dearly. He's very much in that same droid lineage of Anthony Daniels doing C-3PO. It's they feel like kindred spirits, honestly. Even though Huyang is much more knowledgeable, and C-3PO would probably drive him up the wall.
Yes. No.
But yeah, no, it's like, and this is a character who we only ever saw in one arc of Clone Wars, but obviously he made an impression on a lot of viewers. But I'm just so overjoyed with the way they brought him into this, because he's a wonderful character for Ahsoka to bounce off of, especially since Ahsoka is a bit more stoic and moody than she has been in the past. To have Huyang is, sort of gently going like this. He's constantly like, that is the job of a Jedi Padawan, which I am not, and you may not be alone for much longer. It's like between him and Hera, they're really giving her the business of trying to get her to bring Sabine back on.
Yeah, and he has this the line was in the end of the first Ahsoka trailer, which and it is in the show, perhaps framed slightly differently, but when Sabine mentions that she hasn't kept up with her training, Huyang very much says, perhaps it is time to begin again, which kind of feels like a mission statement for the entire show in a way, as these characters set off on a new adventure, and as Ahsoka starts to work through her struggles with the past and what it have meant to have lost Anakin in such a way. That's one of the reasons why I so love that scene between Huyang and Sabine, and the fact that Huyang is so encouraging of Sabine's potential to become a Jedi Padawan, even given the fact that she's not as naturally talented with the Force. Because I do feel, Huyang's been around for 25,000 years, and he's very familiar with the Jedi traditions and the protocols, as he says in their mission protocols. And it seems abundantly clear that under the old Jedi Order, someone like Sabine, who doesn't have the highest midi-chlorian count in the world, probably would not have been selected as a candidate for the Jedi Order. But this is a very different time, and it's clear now that as Huyang and Ahsoka are off on this mission, Huyang kind of wants to see that tradition still live on, even if it comes in a new form. And if that means, taking on a Padawan like Sabine, who might not have the same natural Force talent, but, has the heart of a Jedi and the will of a Jedi and the commitment to discipline and training that it takes to be a Jedi, he is all for it, So, and to see a droid as the that is fair. That is fair. They need they've got a help wanted sign hanging on the door, and they're not getting the 5-star recruits that they once did, but they'll work with what they have. And I love that Huyang, as a droid who is supposed, droids are supposed to be rigid and mechanical, not flowing and organic. I love that he's the one who's open-minded about this.
Yeah. And like I said, it's just so great to have David Tennant be a part of this show in a way that, I expected he might just have like a little part as like a droid. He plays Huyang as like a cameo, and he's in there for a couple quick scenes or something. But to see him as one of the central characters, really, of the show is just so great. And so we come to Hera, who I know I've read that some people have struggled a little bit with her sort of integration into live action and Mary Elizabeth Winstead's performance, because, and this is the thing, like, really all of these characters, with the exception of Chopper and Huyang, who are just direct translations from their animated versions, but they're all a little bit different, because this is what you get when you bring in new actors to play characters. It's like any adaptation. It's like I remember I took some adjusting when Game of Thrones started, and kind of getting used to some of the characters were aged up, and and the actors were bringing their own unique personalities to these characters, and they became slightly different characters in that way. And I think the same is true when you're translating from animated to live action. Unless you are bringing in the exact same actor, there's going to be some differences. And so for me, this is Mary Elizabeth Winstead's take on Hera. And it's not exactly the same, but she does have many of the qualities of Hera. She's got that, mother bear instinct, that we see when she talks to Sabine and to Ahsoka, honestly, too. and then her dynamic with Chopper. So but it is a little bit of a different performance because it's not the same actor. So, but and it was one of the things overall that I kind of struggled a little bit with on my first viewing of the episodes, less so when I went back to rewatch them, which I've done a couple times now, because now I'm getting used to these iterations of the characters, and I think they're all doing a wonderful job. I love the bit with Hera where they're on Corellia and she's like, I'm a general, nothing's classified for me, unseal it. And I'm telling you to unseal it. And he goes, I'm not sure you can. And she goes, want to bet? It's just so wonderful. So yeah, I'm very much enjoying her performance as Hera.
Yeah, I think that Mary Elizabeth Winstead, who I've always liked as an actor, has done a very strong job at taking a character who was very indelibly embodied by Vanessa Marshall in in Rebels, and as you said, making it her own while still feeling like the same character, much as Natasha Liu-Bordizzo is doing with Sabine Wren. It is, I sometimes have a hard time figuring out if people are having just trouble adjusting to the look or if they're actually, giving the performance a fair shake. If you were not aware about the furor that happened on the artist formerly known as Twitter about whether or not Hera's eye color was the proper shade, spare yourself that. It was everyone who got involved in that argument was dumber for it. Suffice it to say that it is that yes, she doesn't look exactly like she does in Rebels, but you know who else doesn't look like that way? Count Dooku, from the Clone Wars. That's kind of my go-to when anyone talks about like, oh, the character doesn't look like they do in Rebels, and I'm like, if Count Dooku's animated form was in live action, it would be a nightmare.
If any human being looked like Count Dooku looks in animated form, I would be very concerned for that person, because that would not be normal. No, I'm glad I've been staying off of social media in general. I now that everybody's going over to Blue Sky, I've been hanging out over there for a bit, but everybody is, because there aren't nearly as many people over there, it's been relatively well behaved. But Twitter is just, as even before all the recent stuff, it had become such a nightmare for people just nitpicking and getting upset about the dumbest things. And character appearances was one of those things. I'm not going to lie. I am one of the people who struggled a bit with the Grand Inquisitor on Obi-Wan. But, I didn't, go on Twitter and yell at people about it. So it's just too much. But I think they've done a great job. I think she looks fantastic. And I'm just marveling at the fact that we're getting these characters in live action who are, just, we would have, and you can get in your shots about Andor now, Jared, but, when, we would have previously gotten just, human characters as lead characters, like in the original Star Wars films and stuff. And Andor does this as well, where it's just try and dial down on the weird factor by having everybody be human, having most of the characters be human. Whereas this, they're just completely leaning into it. Like, we've gone there with animation, and so now it's like, yeah, this character has Leku, and you're just gonna have to deal with it.
Yeah, no shots of Andor here. I love that show dearly. I will just on the positive side, I will say that Dewey and Freedy, their appearance brought me so much joy in that show because they were relatively a scarce commodity.
Yeah, but no, it's just so great to see that kind of stuff in this show, because it's Star Wars really embracing, every corner of the galaxy, and giving us main characters who are aliens, which is great. And for all the crap that I give to Marvel, I am going to give them props for this, as I think they've gotten people used to seeing, somewhat outlandish looking characters on screen. I remember I kind of I thought about this back in the days when Avengers came out, and you had Loki in his full getup with the horns and everything, and I was like, I can't believe this is on a screen and people are taking it seriously, like in a good way.
Yeah. Yeah, I feel like it hasn't, like it almost hasn't been. I mean, there's been a lot of discussion about Hera and some of the other, and Thrawn and how he looks in the trailer, but I feel like it's been remarkably, refreshingly understated about the fact that Ahsoka is the first live-action Star Wars property in which a human is not the main character. Ahsoka is an alien. She is, it's a Gruda. But we're just so used to her that, it doesn't seem strange at all that she, could be the lead of the show, because she looks real. And that was another thing. People were mad about her Leku in The Mandalorian and how they looked. They've taken the, I don't think she needs the gigantic Leku that she had in Rebels. I think that that was a kind of a stylized depiction. I feel like, they've taken it, they've improved the technology clearly, but now she looks great. She looks like Ahsoka.
Yeah, they are a bit longer, and they've moved now, which and I didn't have a real big problem with them in The Mandalorian, because I understood that the practicalities of the real world are you can only do so much, but I will say they've made great strides.
Yeah.
And I love the way she looks now. I want to say hi, AK. Now that we're getting going with the channel again, I need to get you back on here to do the second half of Kill Bill and many other things besides. Thank you for tuning in to watch it. Yeah, but I did have some warming up to do as far as Rosario, because I just loved Ashley Eckstein so much. And for me, she's always going to be when I think of Ahsoka, and this may change, in terms of I think I'll widen up to accept different Ahsokas, but for now, and for all these years when I've thought of Ahsoka, it's been Ashley Eckstein, and and her very bubbly personality, which is a thing that is different. But like you said, Ahsoka has, we haven't really seen her that over the many years since she encountered the Vader. And we got one scene of her where right after that fight, and then we see the epilogue, which is actually a scene that's in this show too. And so we've gotten her immediately after the fight, and then 6 to 7 years after the fight. And so she's been through a lot, I think, in that time, and trying to process all that. So for me, it works that, you know, that she feels a bit different. So, oh, glad to hear it. Yeah, we'll talk very soon about bringing you on for some more stuff. But yeah, so, and let's go ahead and talk about Natasha Liu Bordizzo as Sabine.
She's perfect. She is so good.
Yeah, like I didn't have to really, you know, I've said with the other actors, you know, there's been kind of like I had some adjustment to go through to sort of give my heart over to the new actors, but I feel like with her, she just so perfectly embodied Sabine. That, and I love that first scene we get with her where
yeah.
where, you know, she got the rock song going, which, you know, is that our first rock and roll song in Star Wars since Visions?
Yeah, in the movies and the TV shows. I don't know if you played the video game Jedi Survivor. That has some in-universe tracks that are actually very similar. But yeah, it was a kind of a startling moment. But if any character was going to break the convention of the classical sweeping orchestra, you know, it would be Sabine. So I think it worked quite well.
Oh, it was great, and the fact that, yeah, the fact that we'd had a rock band in Star Wars Visions, which, you know what, even though I rejoice in Visions breaking away from canon, that is like the one story where I'm perfectly fine if that is canon. Because I like it, and then I love that when they're, this is not a Star Wars Visions stream, but I'll just take a moment to say I love, you know, when they're performing the song at the end, and then it cuts to all these different locations. Then it just cuts to this exterior of Ben's hut, you know, on Tatooine, and I just imagine Ben listening there, like tapping his foot to the music. So yeah, it felt perfectly at home, and I love like when the other pilot lands there, and then Sabine speeds up, and she's like, "What's she doing?"
Yeah, and I love at the end when after she pulls that incredible slide to get past the one, and the guy who's trying to bring her in, Captain Porter, is just like, "Well played," and then he lets her go.
And then we also, let's see if I have a picture here. We get the cute little loft cat, which I don't have a picture from the front of it, but everybody, you know, if you watch the show or any of the other shows, you know exactly what a loft cat looks like. So.
Yeah, and the loft cat has been, as any cute animal is online, the loft cat has become, you know, a little bit of a cause celeb. People are really, you know, loving the loft cat, and you know what, have at it. You know, it's very cute with its, you know, big round face and its weird little bird feet. So
just don't get it angry. No, and like same thing when my dad was just like half watching the show today. As soon as the loft cat appeared on screen, he was like, "Well, they're gonna sell, they're gonna sell tons of those." And it's like they have been.
Yes.
But I think that's about to take a step up now that, you know, now that it's an actual, like, it's one of the characters' pets in a live action show, you know, which, and I did see some comments, I think in the Force Center Discord about like, you know, somebody better, Sabine better make sure that somebody's babysitting.
Let Ryder Azadi do it. I think he and that little loft cat will get along famously.
Which, by the way, I'm trying to think if you know, I took this for granted when he was an animated character, but now that Clancy Brown is playing Ryder in live action, I'm trying to think of if I've ever seen Clancy Brown play a nice guy. This may be a first.
I don't know.
Villainous.
I don't know. His character in the Shawshank Redemption just had a heart of gold, don't you?
Oh yeah, yeah. He's such a sweetheart in that. But yeah, no, it's of course the first thing I ever saw him in was Highlander as the Kurgan, and you know, and he's just been villain after villain ever since. But it's so nice to see him like crack a smile and be jovial.
Yeah, especially because, you know, he also voiced Savage Opress in the Clone Wars, who might have had the least amount of sense of humor of any character in that show.
Oh my God. Well, you know, you figure with a name like that, Savage Opress, you know, he's got to be a barrel of laughs.
Yes.
But yeah, God. So yeah. But no, and let's go back to talking about Sabine, because there's still a lot I want to, you know, and talk about her. Just it's just such a fantastic job, and I really love, you know, talking some more about her training. Like, it's so great to, you know, we obviously saw this a little bit in Rebels, but this is live action, you know, her wielding a lightsaber is just like when it came to that duel, you know, between her and, let me bring up her name, Shin. You know, that was just cool. It was like classic Star Wars fun. Just, you know, the lightsabers, because that is something that's, you know, that I miss, you know, in a show like Andor. You know, I love Andor for the fact that it is everything like removed from that. That it's not about Jedi and all that. But it is nice to come back into the realm of, yeah, let's get the lightsabers out and let's do some old fashioned.
No, and then it was a good lightsaber fight too. It was very, you know, well choreographed, and you know, you were on edge. It was a shocking moment, even though you knew she would be okay, when Shin actually stabbed Sabine through the abdomen. But it was, you know, other people have noted that it's, you know, it's also a cool development that aside from that, from the vision sequence in The Rise of Skywalker, where Rey briefly faces off against the dark side version of herself, this is the first on-screen live-action lightsaber duel between two women. Obviously, in the Clone Wars, we saw multiple instances of, say, Ahsoka crossing blades with Asajj Ventress, but this is, you know, this was something. It's kind of another step forward in that way. And I have a feeling, as we see it in the trailer, they'll be crossing blades again, you know.
Yeah.
And I feel like they, as you mentioned, that these two characters seem like they're going to have a little bit of a rivalry throughout the show, which of course, you know, the internet being the internet, if you go on to the website formerly known as Twitter, rivalry in this case means that people have started shipping them. So, you know, but which, you know what, let them have their fun. I do feel that, you know, Shin, you know, stabbing Sabine through the stomach might have put a little damper on any potential romance between the two, but you know, people can, you know, look at Rey and Kylo, look at Rey and Ben. They got over that stab just fine.
Yeah, no, yeah, I'm not going to comment on that. The internet will be the internet. I do think you're right. I think the stab wound will you know, bring about a little bit of an obstacle there. But yeah, no, and I am glad that they went ahead and had to be 2 episodes, because then we would have had to endure a week discussion about that.
It would have been the Grand Inquisitor stab all over again, and I'm just, very glad that we didn't have to deal with that.
But yeah, so I'm trying to think of some stuff that we haven't talked about. So we can talk a bit about the sort of, we'll call it the MacGuffin of of these episodes, which is the map.
Yeah.
Which I'm trying to think if we had a concept like this in any of the other Star Wars stories of expanding out to more and more galaxies.
Well, so there have been other galaxies mentioned in Star Wars before. I believe, definitely in Legends, people are, probably most familiar with the Yuuzhan Vong. But even within canon Star Wars, there have been mentions of other galaxies, such as the Rishi Maze in Attack of the Clones. But this will be the first time that we will actually be traveling there. In any kind of canon or live action storytelling, which will be exciting. And that I have a feeling, that will open up a whole new possibility for what we could see, because, there will still be certain universal rules that that bind everything. I do believe, the Force will still be there because it's present in all living things, but it might be in a form that we've never seen before, and we'll certainly see new sites, possibly meet new creatures and new alien species. I'm very excited to see what we find in, I guess, as they refer to it, the path to Peridea, which sounds like a very high fantasy kind of, you could imagine Arthur and his knights trying to find the path to Peridea. But it's such a cool concept, and it's one that I hadn't considered before the show started. I had been fully expecting that Thrawn and Ezra had been taken to just some distant area, perhaps hard to access area of the unknown regions, like Exegol and the Rise of Skywalker, Octo and The Force Awakens and The Last Jedi. But a completely different galaxy. This is going to be a fun and fascinating thing to see what they have in mind.
Which, of course, that does definitely explain why they haven't returned. It's just let's go ahead and amp this up. It's in the unknown regions. No, let's say an entirely different galaxy. But yeah, no, it'll be, and it seems like. And it does seem like Morgan is overseeing the construction of, I guess, some kind of special hyperspace machine that's going to enable them to get there, because otherwise it would be a very, very long trip.
Yeah, it looks, and other people pointed this out as well, it basically looks like a supersized version of the hyperspace rings that we saw in the prequels for things like the Jedi starfighters that didn't have their own hyperdrive. And in this case, it seemed like perhaps it will be able to grasp onto Thrawn's Star Destroyer and carry it with it, on the return to the known galaxy. The Eye of Sion is what they're calling the ship, which is, I found it's a cool kind of Easter egg reference to the Knights of the Old Republic video game. There was a Sith Lord named Darth Sion. They seem to have, taken the name perhaps as an ode to that character. And one of the other big features in those video games is the entire concept of the star map to find a hidden, or new location in the galaxy. And in terms of just cool visuals, seeing how that star map was unlocked, and then when Morgan does the full thing to blow it out into a full space and identifies the path to Peridea with the new galaxy and that big kind of sphere that arises up around her. I just thought that looked awesome.
Well, it was such a cool, the fact that she brings up, she says, "This is our galaxy," and then everything else comes up, and just the look on Balin's face was like, "Oh, holy shit!" It was great. Yeah. And I love that. That was really good. Um, let's see some other stuff that I wanted to cover from. I do want to say, like, I got a really good chuckle out of seeing the actor Peter Jacobson
Oh yeah.
pop up as Min Weaver, who's in charge of the Corellian shipyard, because like, and I do, rib these shows a bit sometimes for, like, you know uh cameos, but this doesn't really count because he's an actor playing a role just because I recognize him. But I was thinking of his character from the show House.
Good old Dr. Taub.
Yeah. And so, but that just made me smile. So
yeah, and I actually found him to be kind of a fascinating tie-in to the larger politics of this show, with the idea of him, he is a businessman who seems to be in it for the money, not maybe perhaps not necessarily a true believer in the Empire, although he seemed to have some people there who were, more committed to the Empire. But I do love the idea that they talked about, when they find out that the droid came from Corellia, and then they go to talk to him, and they're like, there are ex-Imperials here? And he's like, yeah, there are ex-Imperials at every single level of the New Republic infrastructure. And we saw it, a concept, some of that in The Mandalorian season 3, where they had the whole concept of the amnesty program. But it's not, but in this case, it's like these guys were just, they used to work for the Empire. Now they work for the New Republic. And as they kind of, as Min Weaver perhaps cynically says, he's like, they don't have a loyalty. They don't care as long as they're getting paid, which is very much the, a take on the whole Game of Thrones idea of, the common people pray for health, rain, and a summer that never ends. They care not what games these high lords play. Or you could look at the more cynical aspect of it, which is what Min Weaver basically kind of embodies, which is, I'm loyal to my investors, and, whoever will pay me the most money. And as Ahsoka kind of points out to Hera, when Hera is kind of aghast at how anyone could still be loyal to the Empire, she's like, it's not loyalty, it's greed. And you can start to, and I really kind of love how they're, throughout this show, they're kind of, and The Mandalorian season 3, they're starting to lay the cracks in the foundation of the very well-meaning, I still truly believe this, well-meaning New Republic, to allow people to see how, over the course of the next 30 years, the Empire and the First Order will be able to rise again. Because
it's interesting because it is like, it's true. You can't just, like, with, things like that, the shipyards and stuff, and any, like, corporation, you can't just kick out, all the workers who happened to be there when it was being run by the Empire. That's just not the way things work. It's just, any new society is going to still have people in place in various positions who were in place during the time of the Empire. So but it's the fact that the New Republic seems to, like, turn a blind eye to, like, that they should even be on guard, about anything. So
yeah, and we know that the show will address this, because we've seen the trailer where we've seen the scene with Hera is talking to Chancellor Mon Mothma. And I'm going to be fascinated to hear that conversation, because we know, that Mothma's heart is in the right place. And they've kind of gotten into this in the extended, books and canon storytelling of the idea. Part of it, at least in, some of it is just people wanting to stick their heads in the sands. Like, we beat that enemy, they're gone forever. We would never want to have to deal with it again. But that's not necessarily Mon Mothma's approach. Mothma seems to be more of embodying of the fact of, like, the galaxy has suffered under the reign of this horrific tyrannical empire for 25 years. And or 2025, and we cannot, be like a powerful military force, like showing another fist to the galaxy, which is what one of the things they took it into in extended canon storytelling is as soon as the New Republic took over, Mon Mothma made this huge push to demilitarize, like downsize the New Republic's, fleet in a well-meaning idea of like, we are not the Empire, we're not coming for you and your world, but obviously that has consequences. And Ahsoka actually has a fantastic line in, I think it's the first episode, where she's talking about her decision to walk away from Anakin and her decision to walk away from Sabine, but it applies to this as well, where she says, because Hera's like, I'm sure you had your reasons, and Ahsoka says, sometimes even the right reasons can have the wrong consequences, and what do we do then? And I thought that line was like another kind of excellent, thesis statement about where we are in the current Star Wars galaxy.
Yeah, no, it's really interesting questions, especially as it relates to the amnesty program that we see in The Mandalorian. It's because, and in that case, like, they go too far in the other direction where it's like, no, if you haven't, if we think you haven't perfectly assimilated, we're actually going to screw with your mind, which is, that was one of the creepiest scenes in any of these shows. I thought that was brilliantly done, but also very unnerving, as it relates to what our concept of the New Republic is. And but yeah, no, it's very interested to get that scene with Mon Mothma and the other people from the New Republic. And so yeah, anything else that was in these episodes that you wanted to highlight before we start to wrap up?
So I guess we could maybe talk a little bit about kind of how we, like, essentially the mission. Like, what we can see now is that, the main thrust of, as we knew, this show is going to be the search for Thrawn, and in keeping with that, the search for Ezra as well. But these first two episodes, awesome as they were, kind of really were the setup in a lot of ways.
Yes.
Excellently done setup, but we essentially reintroduced all our characters, we introduced our villains, we introduced our conflict, and now we even caught up to the epilogue from Rebels, and now we're going forward into completely new territory. So I'm not saying we need to like speculate about what's going to happen necessarily. We'll find out soon, unless we want to do so responsibly.
That's what I was going to ask, is because if we were like done talking about what was in the actual episodes, and I was going to ask, like, what do you think is coming up next, and the theories for where we're going.
Well, if we're heading that direction, I would say that I think that we will have at least another episode or two of Sabine and Ahsoka essentially focusing on trying to stop Morgan Elsbeth and Baylan and Shin from reaching this new galaxy. But at some point, and my guess would be probably around the midpoint, perhaps with episode 5, which is going to be the next one directed by Dave Filoni, I think we're going to make the big jump, as it were, which is, I think, all of our characters, or maybe not Hera, I think she might stay behind, but Sabine, Ahsoka, Shin, Baylan, Morgan Elsbeth, I think they will make it to this new galaxy where Thrawn and Ezra are, and that's when, as the kids say, things are really going to start to get wild. So I'm very much looking forward to that. but I'm not necessarily in a rush for them to get there. It's just that like that's kind of the big event on the horizon that I can foresee. I'm happy to kind of take whatever detours they want to along the way, and then the other big detour, if we want to bring it up, I feel like I feel like we should, just because it's something that's on my mind. It really hasn't been much of a secret that at some point we are likely going to see Hayden Christensen's Anakin in this show. And how that happens, when that happens, what form it takes, and most importantly, what effect that is going to have on Ahsoka is, for me, the single thing that I am most excited about in this entire show. Whether it's a flashback, whether it's the world between worlds, whether it's a Force Ghost vision, whether it's all three, I hope it's all three. I cannot wait for that. And, let the Hayden Christensen Star Wars Renaissance continue. I love it.
I just am dying to. I want it to be a flashback because I want to see like Clone Wars era Anakin played by Hayden Christensen, and a little Ahsoka, and we'll see how all that comes together. But I think that would just be fantastic, but also very healing for Ahsoka, probably if she comes in contact with Force Ghost Anakin.
Yeah.
And really maybe healing for us as fans too.
Yeah.
Because aside from that little bit at the end of Return of the Jedi, we don't really get that. But go ahead.
No, and I was going to say, and I think that it actually does make like narrative sense. There will, it's not just like, oh, the fans want to see Hayden, so let's put Hayden in there. It's like, Ahsoka actually has very clearly like unresolved issues regarding Anakin and what happened to him. So, there is a very important narrative reason for Hayden and Anakin to appear. It's not quite the same thing as with at the end of Return to the Jedi when Luke sees Anakin and Obi-Wan and Yoda as the Force Ghosts there watching him and Leia at after the Empire's defeat, because at that point Luke is at peace. He has reached his father, he has redeemed his father, and they kind of are on the same page. They understand each other, which is one of the reasons why he can see him. Ahsoka is not at that point yet, but based on how she appeared in the Book of Boba Fett, I think she'll get to that point. And now we just have to kind of connect those dots. And I do think that when Hayden appears, I will dare to use the word when, not if, as Anakin. I do think it will be an incredibly emotional and cathartic scene, both for the character and hopefully for the audience as well.
Yeah, I feel like it is going to happen. We'll get him at some point in the season, but I'm very open to whenever that is and in whatever capacity. As far as where we're headed next, I feel like, I don't think this is spoiling anything because it's been in the trailers and stuff. We've seen a confrontation between Ahsoka and Balin, and at what presumably looks like that the planet they were already on with the maps and and all that stuff. So I actually wonder if that confrontation is coming sooner rather than later, since it seems like that's where Ahsoka and Sabine are headed now.
Yeah, I think that'll happen in the next episode or two.
Yeah, so that'll be interesting. And I like, aside from that, what's fascinating about this is that I feel like so much of the advertisements that we've seen have like given us a lot of stuff that we got in these first two episodes and some glimpses of things like that. But since all that seems to be coming up pretty quick, I don't really know what to expect beyond that, aside from the fact that we're eventually going to get Thrawn. We know that. It just feels very wide open in terms of what they're actually going to do with the rest of this season, which is kind of exciting.
Yeah.
But
no, this is Dave Filoni kind of has he literally the galaxy or another entire other galaxy is his oyster, because these characters are their fate and their futures are not set. And I'm not one of those people who was like, oh, if we know how a character ends, then there's no drama. For me, the story is in the journey. But in this case, we have both the journey and the end point is, unknown, other than we know that at some point, presumably, probably in Dave Filoni's movie, Thrawn will probably be defeated. But God knows what can happen, until then. I'm also people are like, when, could we see certain characters die? I'm like, that's not really what I'm most interested in here. I do think that, yes, we could possibly see a character or two, go at some point, but there are other sources of drama that await us. We have a wide open swath of possibilities as to where these characters can go and what they can, who they can meet and how they can interact with, and that's really exciting.
I think it's funny. I think it's the Game of Thrones syndrome, where it's like Game of Thrones flipped everything by killing characters that we cared about, where before we were like, oh no, these characters are safe, and now we expect characters to die left and right, just because that's what we've become accustomed to. But that's not necessarily, and we're not necessarily headed that way with the show, but maybe we are. But I think I'm even guilty of that, because I thought for sure that Bo-Katan was going to die at the end of season 3 of The Mandalorian, and I'm very happy that turned out to be wrong. But yeah, so who knows? I don't know. I'm prepared for any and all things, and I like that I don't necessarily know where it's going, and but again, there's a lot of characters that I'm hoping to see. I do think there's a pretty good chance we get Rex at some point this season. I say this with every show that every season of every show that comes out, I'm on Hondo watch.
I personally, and I could be 100% wrong, I think Hondo's going to be in Skeleton Crew, which is probably the next live action Star Wars show we're getting. I personally don't think he's going to be in this particular show, but if he is, I'm going to be very happy to see him.
I mean, if there's from what I understand, there's pirates involved in Skeleton Crew, so it would be that would be a very good opportunity for him to show up, and it seems like he would fit in with the tone of what that show's going to be. So
yeah.
So yeah,
I'm very, I'm happy to see any and all characters pop up, whether it's just for little cameos like Ryder Azadi and Jai Kell in this show, or if it's for in more substantial roles. If it fits the story, I'm going to be happy to see it. I will say I do personally think, for those who are hoping for the big guy, I don't think we're going to get a lot of Zeb in this show, if at all. I do think he will appear, but I think it'll probably be if he does appear, it'll probably be a smaller role. We saw where he was in The Mandalorian. It seems like he's kind of off on his own, path right now. But if they need the cavalry will probably come in.
Well, and that's where it goes into that this is not Rebels season 5, so it's not about bringing the whole gang in. It is Ahsoka and and these characters that we know and love will come in as they're needed. But I almost feel like I wouldn't even be surprised if he doesn't appear. I think that the fact that we got him in that episode of The Mandalorian was to show us that Zeb's out there. You know, he's doing his thing for the New Republic, and just so, and like I feel better about, you know, getting other characters like Hera in this show, knowing that I've already seen Zeb. Like if we hadn't gotten him there and then say he doesn't appear in this season, then I would have felt like, oh, we're never gonna get Zeb because he's too complicated to do in live action. But the fact that we did get him and he looked fantastic just tells me that at some point in the future we'll be getting like you know, a full-on Rebel crew, you know, reunion. And whether that's the show or if it comes down the line, you know, maybe in the big Dave Filoni movie, you know, either way, I'm patient for that, and I'm just glad that we got to see him on The Mandalorian.
Yeah, and if I may dare to be so bold as well, and this could totally, you know, be, you know, because it is taking place in the same time, I personally am going to predict, if, you know, I'll bet a nickel on it, that Din and Grogu do not appear in this season. I do think that those stories will eventually intersect. I do think that they, you know, eventually, you know, it will all come together in that Dave Filoni movie. But I would be surprised, particularly if part of this story ends up taking place in a completely different galaxy. I would be surprised if, you know, the Mandalorian and his those characters show up, because, and maybe I just don't want it to be, because I, you know, as much as I love those characters, I really don't want the discourse to take over again and this be like, oh, it's the Book of Boba, what happened with the Book of Boba Fett again, which I liked how those characters were used in that show, but people, that if it happens again, I'm worried people are gonna be like, oh, well, they're gonna have to have, they just have to have Grogu and everything, and I'm like, maybe you don't need him in this show.
I actually would have been more more inclined to think that they would pop up like before I got a glimpse at this show. I think the fact that it's obvious to me that, and I know some people use this in a disparaging way, but I do kind of look at the Book of Boba Fett as sort of the Mandalorian season 2.5. It's very obvious stylistically that it's meant to be of a piece with the Mandalorian, from, you know, the style of, like, you know, the credits and, you know, and everything, and the music, and it just, whereas with this is stylistically, like, you know, it's charted a different path. So for me, I don't think we'll be seeing that, and if it does happen, I'd be more upset about the discourse that would entail, rather than, like, if they do it in a way that works, fine. What I wouldn't want is, and in general, I have mixed feelings about the way it unfolded with the Book of Boba Fett. I don't want them to divert to a completely different story for part of this, because this is Ahsoka's story, and so I just want them to stay focused on that. But I don't really expect it, just because this feels very, the way the story is structured, this, and I've found it interesting that these are referred to as parts instead of chapters. I think this is meant to be one singular storyline, almost like an extended film, versus seasons of The Mandalorian are much more episodic.
This feels more like Obi-Wan Kenobi in that way.
Yeah, and we were just talking about this, Peter Griffin. I think we are going to. I think we'll get Rex at some point. It feels like they've already got, you know, they've brought Tamora back in for Boba Fett, and for, you know, he was a clone trooper in Obi-Wan. I just, you know, I don't think they're going to pass up that opportunity. I think we'll get wrecked.
I do as well.
And then like that'll make me, and if we do get him, like that's just gonna make me so emotional to see him and Ahsoka together. So I think it'll be great. All right, so we'll go ahead and wrap up. Wanted to go ahead and announce that we do have something set up for next week. We're going to be talking about an all-time favorite of mine. It's been one of my top 3 films, going all the way back to when I first saw it, and that'll be the film Braveheart. So I'm very much looking forward to that. It's been one of those that I've been meaning to get around to for ever since the channel started up. I guess I never been able to find the right guest for it, but I suggested that to you, and you were like, let's go for it. So
yeah, I'm excited. I love that film as well. It's one early favorite of mine, and it'll be a complete something, maybe not completely different, but we're going from a galaxy far, far away to medieval Scotland. So let's we'll take an earthbound detour for a little while, but still a great movie.
Yeah, no, it'll be great because I just I'm probably not that recently, but it's recent enough. I bought the 4K Blu-ray of it, and I don't think I've actually had the chance to sit down and watch it. So that's going to be a lot of fun. It's been a while since I sat down to watch the whole thing, but you guys know I'll be waxing poetic about the James Horner soundtrack for that film because it is one of the all-time greats. So yeah, so I guess that's it. I'll let you go ahead and if you want to wrap up by letting people know where they can follow you, or anything you're up to, Jared.
Well, Well, I know that there has been some of them an exodus from there. I am still on the website formerly known as Twitter. I still have my account there on X at jkozel, where I am still posting about sports and what conference is Stanford going to be in? Like, are they going to the ACC? Still boggles my mind. But I also am still focusing on, the Star Wars and the other stories we love there. I did recently join Blue Sky. John was kind enough to have one of our friends, OB Brown, give me an invite code. So I am over there as well, also at J Kozel. And then you'll also be able now to find me here on John Webster Film when we have our conversations about the movies and TV shows we love. So I will be looking forward to it.
Yep. So next week we'll have Braveheart, and then at some point in the next couple of weeks we'll have Ari coming on so we can talk about the 20th anniversary of Pirates of the Caribbean, which looking forward to. We've already had a good amount of Pirates streams on this channel, but you haven't been there for them, Jared. So
I was lurking in the comments section for those, but I will be happy to talk about one of the films that truly kicked off not only my love for for film in general, but the first film where I truly noticed one Miss Keira Knightley. Let's say.
She opened those eyes, and that first scene she's in, and it was like there was no turning back. But we'll save all that for that stream. Anyway, thank you guys for tuning in. for those of you who came in, at various points during the live stream, and for anybody watching afterwards. Remember, if you haven't subscribed, please go ahead and do that. And hope you'll forgive me. I do feel like I was a little bit rusty this week. That's what happens when you're sort of off and on, doing the channel for a while. But now we'll be getting back into the groove of things, and looking forward to talking some movies with you all. So I hope you guys enjoyed this, and come back next week for Braveheart, and then in a couple weeks we'll also continue our Ahsoka discussion. So yeah. So I forget what I usually say at the end of these things. It's been too long. But I hope you guys have a great night, and we'll see you next week. Bye.
Take care, everyone. Bye-bye.